So in the first part of this retrospective, I summarized the 5 games in the Legacy of Kain series. I also posed the question if whether or not the story had withstood the test of time. Now, before I get into it, I wanted to point out some good things about the series and what it brought to the gaming landscape. While some of these aspects aren't unique to LOK, its contributions shouldn't be taken for granted. So, without further stalling for time, the original Blood Omen was a top-down adventure game which felt like Gauntlet had a one-night stand with Link to the Past. See, while 1986 seemed like the space age with a powerful PlayStation, the hardware still had its limitations. However, the appeal of the new system emboldened the scope that the developers had in mind. So they chose to keep a familiar 2D perspective in order to tell a larger story, but with more detailed sprites and environments than their earlier contemporaries. To add further life to static scenery, they added the day-night mechanic and some weather effects. In caves and dungeons, there are strong uses of light and shadows to give the location more depth and mystique as you explored. Also, there are the occasional detailed shifts over to some scenic scapes of places you can fast travel to. And of course,
Nupraptor's keep lay west of Vassabont.
Voiceover narration is a staple that would go on throughout the entirety of the series. Our anti-hero pulls double duty as he's not just slicing the throats of random hoodlums. He's also giving us his personal, cynical insight on any given situation or location.
Things that were alive and pure, or perhaps it simply decided that I was twisted enough. This lunatic was delighted to see me. The gypsies, purveyors of distrust and superstition.
Whoa, stop right there, Kain. That is not cool, bro. They prefer to be called Romani. Anyway, Kain also provides vital information and personal insight that builds the world of Nosgoth for the player. It's a trait that Raziel carries over in Soul Reaver, since that version of Nosgoth has seen a millennium's worth of history we haven't been witness to yet. This leads to my next bit of praise. I think we can all agree that early generation console games that had any voice acting generally landed in one category.
It's not too late. Stop the coup now! Never. If that's your decision, prepare yourself!
I have made a creature to rule over mankind. This is the final battle.
Your words are as empty as your soul. Mankind ill needs a savior such as you.
Oh, Barry!
That was too close. You were almost a Jills.
Cringeworthy. But the Legacy of Kain games were one of the few early adapters of getting talented actors to fill out the roles of their games. With the formula Blood Omen presented, could you imagine sitting through hours of narration if the posh tones of Simon Templeman didn't carry the weight of making Kain, an otherwise unlikable character, a damn delight? I mean, imagine if, instead, the guy who voiced Dracula in Symphony of the Night voiced Kain in his entirety.
I woke up to the pain of a new existence, in a womb of darkness and decay. Perhaps the head of her beloved will convince Ariel I've accomplished my task. What is a Nupraptor? A miserable little pile of secrets. But enough talk and so forth and go on, you get it.
And it wasn't just him. Legends like Michael Bell, the late Tony J, Paul Lukather, Rene Aubergenois, as well as outstanding talents like Richard Doyle, Greg Berger, Anna Gunn. Yes, that Anna Gunn. Only to name a few. These days, we've become used to high-end vocal talents providing life for these characters. But back then, it was seen as a heavy expense upon development and not as a desired career path for the actors. That's why on average, you got performances that were better known for their cheese factor rather than how well we bought into the moment. Anyway, even if you found what they were saying to be a bit much, you can't deny that these actors behind the mics gave it their all. The actors who can commit can add a special dimension to your storytelling. Now, unfortunately, this is also where my praise ends. I mean, after all, I came here to bury Kain, not to praise him.
Alas, poor Nupraptor.
See that?
I knew him well.
I can bastardize Shakespeare too.
Well, not really.
This is going to get me a lot of hate, but I'm not going to mince words on this. The writing's bad. Well, specifically the dialogue is the biggest offender. If I had to give an award out for excessive prose, it would definitely go to Soul Reaver 2, as it tried to jam-pack every encounter with a reimagining of Hamlet meets the Lord of the Rings.
You shall not pass.
Now, as someone who studied literature, I let myself believe that this writing was good at the time in comparison to its peers because it seemed to be trying to have intelligent storytelling. But why would I turn against it now? Well, several reasons. First, the old cinema rule of show, don't tell. With Blood Omen, the narration was necessary as it was the fastest way to convey things that couldn't be shown because of the original hardware limitations. I mean, the constant scenery was either a forest, a town, a cave, a snowy forest, or some form of hellscape. Kain telling us what was going on was a good distraction, most of the time.
Contained within the metal of the scales, and would eventually be released back into the pillar from whence it came. The scales of Anacroth I lay before the pillar of stakes.
And again, a lot happened before Soul Reaver, so being told what was going on with the protagonist made sense. However, from Soul Reaver 2 on, Raziel and subsequently Kain tended to blather on ad nauseum. The decision to have them describe a scene rather than just show us felt more like laziness than some right of artistic language building. And I appreciate the work of both Bell and Templeman, but the obsessive need to fill voids with their commentary becomes unbearable after a while.
I would first have to find a way back into the material realm.
This door was clearly significant. The answers I sought surely lay within.
This mysterious chamber was clearly significant. Perhaps I would finally find the elusive Vorador within.
A new area of the vampire citadel lay open. I still had much to discover.
The developers were also trying to establish a ye olde English type backdrop. But there was something horribly unbalanced when their recap to the previous game just abrades the last part of Soul Reaver.
Tell me, did it trouble you to murder your brothers?
Did it trouble you when you ordered me into the abyss?
No. I had faith in you. Tell me, did it trouble you to murder your brothers?
Did it trouble you when you ordered me into the abyss?
Eternity is relentless, Raziel.
In part, it was because there were players that were unfamiliar with the plot, so they had to be caught up to speed. Then have every following unskippable scene eat away at the player's patience by forcing them to delve into a dictionary to understand plot points that went on for 5+ minutes straight. Let's look at a conversation between Raziel and Vorador.
Are you the catalyst of these events? Or the answer to them? I will speak plainly then.
But he doesn't.
I distrust your origins, stranger. Seeing you crawl from the putrid depths of Mobius's keep makes me question your purpose here. And what should I make of your appearance? Not human, clearly, and more demon than vampire. And the pillars. It is no mere coincidence that your arrival in that clearing heralded the pillars' decay. And so I ask you plainly, are you the instrument of the pillars' destruction or their salvation?
The biggest problem is that this pontificating dialogue really dulls the impact of dramatic and emotional scenes. We can't focus on the scope of what's happening because of how much they're saying, and it tends to make a storyline that is already a bit convoluted seem downright pretentious and insufferable. Continuity is another thing that struggled, but there are things to know going forward. I need to bring attention what Crystal Dynamics was working with. For anyone not familiar with the history, the concept was originally cooked up by then developers Silicon Knights and published by Crystal Dynamics. After Blood Omen's release, there was a falling out between the two, and after some litigious battles, the rights for the property fell into the hands of Crystal Dynamics. Now, Blood Omen was a success, and Crystal Dynamics wanted to develop a follow-up. They ended up basing the final build of the game on an early concept known as Shifter. As well, a few of the people involved in the original game worked on and helmed Soul Reaver, with Soul Reaver 2 being the full showcase of the new direction they were taking. This included turning Raziel's dynamic with several characters more adversarial while toning down his grudge with Kain, who was shifted, Ha ha ha. More to a misunderstood pawn of fate with murky moral value. With that, the obvious villain mantle was taken up by the Elder God and Mobius, who's hard to buy as a credible antagonist since all he does is just skulk around behind the scenes of everything trying to guile everyone. Anyway, in a lot of regards, Crystal Dynamics tried to be good to the faithful fans. There's a lot of throwbacks to Blood Omen, and some of the major design choices were made, like chained up slaves that could be used as a sacrifice.
Please, help me, somebody help me, please!
Or Kain's use of the Vae Victus as he fights. Or trying to implement a save system in Soul Reaver 2 that mirrored Blood Omen. Or that weird blood siphoning thing. But, as can be the case with complex fantasy storylines involving time-traveling vampires, there are quite a few hiccups in the continuity. These things range from tiny illogical inconsistencies to major plot-breaking questions. For example, why does the rain or snow not harm older Kain even though he's still vulnerable to water? Why do they keep chaining people up regardless of the era? How does his blood siphoning work? Do they have black holes in their mouths specifically for blood? What do these humans survive on? Why did Raziel's pants melt away but not his calf bracelets? Also, how does his cloak keep fastened to his face? Why does Raziel keep losing his elemental reavers, and why are the more potent reavers easier to acquire than the ones that need constant re-imbuing? Why does Raziel wait so long to bust out his advanced combat dance techniques? How does Hag know that Raziel went to the past to send his minions at the right time to stop him? Also, how did Hag, by way of Mortanius, get Vampire Terrell from the future without Mobius getting wise to him? What happens to all the soul-saving devices from Blood Omen and Soul Reaver 2? If Raziel can will himself to have a better form in Defiance than in Zombie, why doesn't he will himself to have a superior form than the one he's been griping about with wings and a jaw? Why isn't Mobius and Raziel talk about Mobius' incoming death when it should have already happened according to Blood Omen? And most importantly, why are Kain and Malik still guardians after their respective deaths? New guardians are chosen from birth by the powers that be, and both of them are killed in the first 5 minutes of Blood Omen, which they both acknowledge.
But I am dead.
It is not often that a man sees his own corpse.
Of course, these can mostly be explained as an oversight during production, but that's problematic with a game that takes its story as seriously as this one does. It's also a problem of different writers working on the same fantasy-laden story. It's too convenient to answer magic when something doesn't make sense. And it leaves us with a whole written plot that has one character who has far more power than the rest and can keep the pillars from hiring new replacements, yet cannot fight off demonic possession. And don't get me started on the whole Scion of Balance thing. God help me. Let's take a moment to watch Blood Omen 2 try to be too meta.
Yes, but what was really stunning was the pathos of the protagonist. The way he couldn't decide whether to allow fate to sweep him forward or if he should thwart destiny's cruel hand.
Oh yes, that was interesting.
So it's fair to say that the overall conflict of these games is the defiance of fate. Oh, I see what you did there. And the notion of fate is an existential crisis as far as human life goes. Do we really have a say in what becomes of our lives, or are we the unwitting pawns of circumstances beyond our control? Great question to ask, but as far as an interactive game goes, metaphysical concepts rarely make for great boss fights. The thing is, while in normal text or cinematic storytelling, conflict can be a slow boil with lulls of nothing happening leading to a climax if done right. Video games, on the other hand, have to rely on almost constant, controlled conflict broken apart by climaxes of varying magnitude. Or, to put it simply, there are stages with enemies, and then there are battles with bosses. The problem was they couldn't marry the idea of their storytelling to the mechanics of a video game. That's why LOK sets up fate not as an immovable, unknowable force, but as powerful monsters that can exist nearly anywhere and in all instances of time, and have an inexhaustible supply of cannon fodder minions to make sure things go the way they want. Then there's the issue of which set of logic has prominence in the game. either story logic or gameplay logic. In my opinion, I feel the story needs to make sacrifices of logic for the ease of gameplay experience to have a stable flow of progress to make sure the game is good. What does that mean exactly? It means your character can carry an entire armory unhindered, or monsters cough up allowances upon death, or there are magical rooms that shield you from all foes and contain boxes linked via magic wormhole so you have access to all your items. However, Soul Reaver 2 was bereft of a lot of the common mainstays of games. There were no bosses, no significant additions to Raziel's gameplay, and even makes you reacquire one power to make sure the story told is dramatic. It may make sense in terms of the story you want to tell, but also makes for an unenjoyable experience that isn't replayable. Aside from that, cutscene interactions feel like they take 1,000 hours to sit through, with bits of explanation for random items given in later titles that also screw up pacing.
This edifice, marked with the elemental light symbol.
Once again, in Blood Omen, it made some sense, since sometimes you needed to know what an item did. You might forget from time to time, although why plain text couldn't be used, I don't know. It's clearly an artistic choice, but still. Though in fairness, Defiant at least tried to fix these complaints and make combat a bit more enjoyable so the goons didn't feel like mandatory health grinds, but you still run into issues of being lost and bombarded with commentary, and the fighting is an experience grind. Ah! Another problem is we don't see this from a point of view that's even remotely relatable, and that's a crucial element in any story. Kain and Raziel are supernatural beings with great designs that border onto the realm of demigodhood. They're also highly unlikable when you really look at them. We know very little of Kain as a human, but as a vampire he's snide, indignant, selfish, belligerent, short-sighted, and sadistic. Also in his early days he looks like a slightly younger vampire Mr. Burns, which might explain why he's not a big fan of the poor working class in Nosgoth.
It will bring light and heat and no cost for oil or coal. And they bring it right down to the poorer quarters for us simple folk to use. Hey, what do you say we,
Well, we've taken our usual share already.
He's getting greedier. Why shouldn't we? It's not like he pays us more than a pittance.
And as Vampire Emperor, he's complicated while lacking any actual depth, if that makes any sense.
Oh, don't be simple.
His first portrayal in Soul Reaver can only be taken so seriously as they made the game with different intentions. In Soul Reaver 2, he seems to be just trying to cheat his fate as Balance Guardian and get the pillars back into vampire hands. That sounds noble until you realize he sees humans as a reserve for Red Capri Sun. Despite the change in his relationship with Raziel, he still wants to be in power. As for Raziel, well, he's fickle. His motivations are clear and understandable at first. Because of Soul Reaver's amazing opening CGI, we can feel invested in his anger and his quest for revenge. On top of that, in a world of monster vampires, his descendants were specifically wiped out after lifetimes of service. Also, the juxtaposition of having him be born from hallowed vampire killers was smart. But then Soul Reaver 2. Dear Elder God, his fixation on their nobility was obnoxious. So, we have a hero that crosses time fueled by vengeance, being sweet-talked by a guy who was a legendary con man whom he should have throttled the minute his bony feet hit the past. Instead, Raziel just leaves him be secured in a smug sense of righteous indignation. Fast forward a bit, Raziel conveniently finds himself with two Reavers. Razi senses in full alert. He feels Mobius had something to do with this and has the opportunity to kill him right then and there. Yeah, but no. Raziel, the demonic antihero outside the bounds of fate, is satisfied that he spooked Mobius a little. Well, it's not like Mobius is plotting anything. Oh. Of course, later Raziel tries to leave with Mobius trying to beg him to reconsider killing Kain. This is his reply to the notions of that and saving Nosgoth.
Oh, I'm sick of hearing that particular phrase. I do not serve Kain. I merely did not kill him. As for saving Nosgoth, So far, I see precious little reason to bother.
Raziel is also needlessly indignant in numerous parts. I mean, not that surprising since his human self was this. He turns hostile towards former allies while giving Kain, his mutilator and murderer of his clan, a second chance. He then states he does this because he wants answers, and then he considered Janos his mentor after 5 minutes. Then, after changing his mind in regards to killing Kain, he regards to his mentor like this.
I'm not who you think I am, nor is this a benevolent act. I have questions that apparently you alone can answer. Why then would the vampires devise a weapon to consume and imprison their savior? It was you who bound me to this fate. Only you can release me.
It's weird that he tries to save face, though I guess he's being a little stingy after losing his jaw. Even though I'm sure he could have gotten the same answers if he just asked instead of trying to butch it up. Of course, his greatest failing is that in spite of his cries of foul and Kain's refusal to die, he himself is then faced with a difficult life or death option, which he also falters. Though, I guess he makes up for it later on. In a ballsier work of fiction, Kain would have stayed dead, and Raziel would have stayed trapped for eternity while going insane, instead of, you know, Vampire Jesus and his magic sword. Then there's the reality that any human characters showcased are specifically members of the Circle of Nine and have some divine connections. With some very mild exceptions within Blood Omen 2, the games often just have normal humans around solely as storage for extra health, and the heroes are right to pop them at will. A normal person's fate in this world is pointless no matter if I continue to the very end or quit after another bullshit death or glitch. And all that just begs one big question with the whole revenge hero's quest as a whole here. Why the hell should Nosgoth be saved? For the vampires? Name a vampire outside of Kain, Vorador, and Janos. Uma? Why is she so important? Got nothing, do you? Neither did Kain.
No!
Yeah, aside from no relatable humans, there aren't even vampires to latch onto. The aforementioned 3 are special cases. Janos is Smurf Dracula, Kain is specifically made using Janos' heart, and Vorador is the first human vampire. And Blood Omen 2's cadre? They sure do exist, don't they? Except for that one guy. Hell, even the reveal of the Hilden is a lazy effort to make the vampires seem the better option.
I hate every living being from that place. I await the moment when all of it is destroyed.
Kill them so quickly, the work slows and our brethren will be longer in joining us.
It is true.
Be patient, cousin. Soon we will have no further need to work in secret.
The smell will be gone forever.
They're evil for the sake of being evil, and on top of that, having the Elder God be the big bad makes the ancient vampires, a race that was built up throughout the entirety of that game, seem like idiots. It also sours our view on Kain's mission, as it seems utterly infantile for a character that's supposed to be wizened beyond the limits of feeble human mortality.
What a love of doors these pathetic humans have.
Though I guess that broken hero worship gives him and Raziel one more talking point. Ultimately, what we're left with is a sloppy attempt at an epic with characters we can't relate to, with a set of stakes that don't even matter. The stories and games themselves do not withstand the test of time and are very much a staple of the years they arrived on. I can respect their ambitions and acknowledge that their productions were met with difficulties, as can often be the case with game development. In fact, many of the games have a large wealth of cut content. Although, the games never really did make it past the cult classic following, and I don't mourn the loss of a continued storyline from Defiance. However, I firmly believe if there was an IP that deserves a reboot, it's this one. Why, you may ask, am I saying this after publicly battering the franchise? Because there are some elements about the series that can persevere. It's not overstating too much that the designs brought by Soul Reaver, and even Blood Omen 2, are some of the most visually striking a person can see. And there is some potential in the Nosgoth setting. Sure, the MMO only lasted so long, but it attempted to flesh out a part of the history that could have been chock full of interesting stories and gameplay potentials. Also, there was a cancelled installment titled Dead Son leaked out, and showed us an entirely new story in that world with combat very much like the Batman Arkham games with a familiar gory fantasy setting. You'll also notice that the dialogue and character interactions are vastly improved, with better pacing and even a flight mechanic. We've also seen expansive games rife with content in a fantasy world within amazing games like The Witcher 3 and The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim, which also has a vampire mechanic should you choose to explore it. I don't think it's too far off to think with the right direction, the right resources, and a revamped combat system, a great Legacy of Kain game could be made. Now, I expect this video will get a lot of contempt, and you have the right to think these games are better than I say. If anything, your fervor proves the viability of a new variation on the series. These games aged poorly, but I think they do deserve a new lease on unlife. Like I said way back, the property has been in the hands of Square Enix, who acquired it alongside of other IPs when they bought out Crystal Dynamics. They've already done several reboots of long-dormant franchises to decent success. But do yourselves a favor, Square Enix. Cut down on the Shakespeare, show us something interesting instead of describing it, and let us actually enjoy the world, rather than walk us along gauntlets of slam poetry. Also, don't have Kain say, "I didn't ask for this." Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed. I'd like to get this channel churning out content, so feel free to like, share, and subscribe if you want to see more. Why not check out my other video comparing techniques for the different versions of the girl with the dragon tattoo? More is on the way, so stay tuned.